replacing gourmet dishes with simpler, cheaper ones. She fired 3 more employees, including a sommelier who dared to oppose her plans to sell off part of the wine collection. The regular customers began leaving one by one. The press started to notice the changes. A small article in the local paper asked what was happening to the once famous Legacy Crown restaurant. Caris remained calm. She continued working in her bakery, met with former Crown employees, and discussed potential actions with her lawyer, but she took no steps to stop Tamsin. "Why don't you get involved?" Bram asked her during another meeting. "She's destroying everything Eris created." "I know," Caris replied quietly, "but sometimes you have to give a person enough rope to hang themselves." On the 10th day after taking over the restaurant, Tamsin made a fatal mistake. She refused to serve a state representative who had been a regular Crown customer for more than 20 years because a friend of hers, a local businessman with a dubious reputation, wanted his table. The scandal erupted instantly. The representative wrote an angry social media post, and journalists picked up the story. By nightfall, the Legacy Crown was the center of a media storm. Everyone was asking what had become of the legendary restaurant after Eris Holloway's death. And that same night, Bram, unable to bear it, resigned, refusing to cook frozen food dishes at elevated prices. 4 other cooks left with him. Without a chef and half the kitchen staff, with a tarnished reputation and canceled reservations, the Legacy Crown was on the verge of closing. Tamsin, inexperienced in the restaurant business, didn't know how to handle the crisis. Only when the situation became desperate did Jarvis finally realize that his mother wasn't saving the restaurant. She was destroying it with her hasty actions and craving for control. The day after Bram's departure, the Legacy Crown opened later than usual. Tamsin paced around the restaurant trying to find a replacement chef. Her bright pink suit clashed with the elegant interior, designed by Eris with muted colors and dark wood details. "I don't see what the problem is," she announced to the remaining staff, gathering them in the dining room. "If one cook left, we'll find another. Atlanta is full of people who can cook." Nita Price, who was still clinging to her manager position, coughed softly. "Ms. Niles, Bram is not just a cook. He is a Michelin-starred chef who has worked here for 15 years. Many customers come just for his dishes." Tamsin waved her hand dismissively. "Nonsense. People come to the Crown for the reputation and the atmosphere. A star or two, what difference does it make? What matters is that the food is presentable." No one dared to object. The staff exchanged silent glances, realizing their fears had come true. The new owner had no idea about the subtleties of fine dining. Tamsin continued giving instructions. "Robert will handle the chef duties today. We'll keep the menu simple, only the most popular dishes, and no French names. People need to know what they're ordering." Robert, a young chef with 3 years of experience, turned pale. He was talented, but he wasn't ready to take charge of a prestigious restaurant kitchen. "Ms. Niles, I'm not sure I can handle the head chef position. Maybe we should close temporarily and look for a professional replacement for Bram." Tamsin narrowed her eyes. "Close? Don't even think about it. The Crown will not lose a single day. You'll be fine, don't worry. Cook the same dishes as before, only simpler." She turned to Nita. "What are our reservations for today?" Nita consulted her tablet. 18 tables for dinner. 3 of them are regulars, including Senator Harrison. "Excellent, we'll manage." But that night was the beginning of the end for the Legacy Crown. Robert, trying his best, couldn't reproduce Bram's exquisite dishes. Without sous chef Liam and the other experienced chefs, the kitchen was slow and uncoordinated. The dishes came out late and weren't always perfectly cooked. Senator Harrison, a gray-haired gentleman with impeccable manners, returned his steak twice and called Nita over. "My dear, what is going on?" he asked quietly, but with evident concern. "I've been dining here every week for 20 years, and I've never been so disappointed." Nita cast a quick glance in the direction of Tamsin, who was talking to other diners. "We're having temporary difficulties, Senator. Bram is no longer with us." "What?" The senator didn't hide his surprise. "But he is the soul of this place. What happened?" "New leadership, new vision," Nita replied diplomatically. Senator Harrison nodded sympathetically. "I heard Eris left the restaurant to her goddaughter. Is that true?" "Yes, but it's a complicated situation." "I understand," he sighed. "Please give the chef my condolences and my check, please. I'm afraid I won't be able to finish dinner tonight." When the senator left, other disappointed guests followed. By the end of the evening, half the reserved tables were empty. People either left before finishing dinner or simply didn't show up, canceling their reservations at the last minute. Tamsin was furious. "What is going on?" she snapped at Nita as the last diners departed. "Why are there so many cancellations? And what is all this nonsense about picking at the food?" Nita rubbed her temples wearily. "Miss Niles, the Legacy Crown is a fine dining restaurant. Our customers expect a certain level of quality and service. They notice the changes, especially the repeat customers." "Then we need new customers," Tamsin cut in. "More democratic, less snobby, more normal people who just want good food without all the pretense." "But the restaurant's reputation can be changed," Tamsin interrupted. "Starting tomorrow, we'll lower the prices by 20% and advertise. I've already made arrangements with the local paper." Nita knew it was useless to argue. Tamsin was deaf to any argument that contradicted her vision. That same night, in the small apartment above the Sweet Dreams Bakery, Caris received an unexpected guest, Jarvis. He looked exhausted, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "I didn't know you lived here," he said, glancing around the modest dwelling. "A temporary solution." Caris placed a cup of tea in front of him. "What brings you here so late?" Jarvis cupped the mug with his hands, as if seeking warmth. "The restaurant isn't going as planned." There was no gloating in Caris's voice, only a touch of irony. "It's gotten complicated. Bram left, several other cooks with him. The customers aren't happy. Mom," he hesitated. "Mom is sure it's just a temporary difficulty, but I don't know." "What did you expect, Jarvis?" Caris asked. "The Legacy Crown isn't just a location and a name. It's the people, the traditions, the reputation forged over the years." Jarvis ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that always betrayed his nervousness. "I know. It's just, Mom was so sure. She had always dreamed of owning her own restaurant." "An opportunity to take someone else's inheritance," Caris finished quietly. Jarvis wrinkled his nose. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that with the papers. It was wrong." Caris looked at her husband, trying to see if his remorse was sincere or just a reaction to the problem. "What do you want from me, Jarvis?" "Help us." He looked at her pleadingly. "Talk to Bram. Convince him to come back, or at least help us find a new chef. You have contacts in the culinary world." Caris shook her head. "You don't understand. Bram won't come back as long as your mother runs the restaurant. He respected Aries and her vision, and Tamsin. She wants to turn the Crown into something completely different." "She's just trying to make the restaurant more affordable, more profitable," Caris interrupted, "at the expense of quality and reputation." "It won't work, Jarvis. The Legacy Crown has never been a place for ordinary people. It's a restaurant for special occasions, for gourmets, for those who appreciate exceptional quality and are willing to pay for it." Jarvis sighed. "I tried to explain it to Mom, but she won't listen. She's sure she knows best, and you can't stand up to her." It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. Jarvis lowered his eyes, and the gesture was more eloquent than any words. All his life, he had been controlled by an authoritarian mother, and even now at 36, he couldn't find the strength to contradict her. "I just want things to get better," he said softly. "I want the restaurant to work, and I want you to come home. I want things to go back to how they were." Caris looked at her husband intently. "Nothing will go back to how it was, Jarvis. Too much has changed." The next day, Caris met with Barclay Quinn in his office. The lawyer greeted her with an expression of contained satisfaction. "I hear things aren't going well at the Legacy Crown," he said, gesturing for her to sit down. "Yes," Caris nodded. "Bram is gone. Customers aren't happy. Jarvis came yesterday asking for help." "And what did you tell him?" "That nothing would be the same." She smiled faintly. "But I didn't come here for that. I need your advice on what to do, the possible next steps." Barclay leaned back in his chair, watching her closely. "Do you want to regain control of the restaurant?" "Yes, but not just regain it. I want to create something new, while preserving Aris's legacy." Caris pulled a notebook from her purse. "I've met with Bram, Nita, and other key staff. They are willing to work with me. I have an idea to open a new restaurant elsewhere." Barclay leaned in, interested. "Tell me more." "I found a location near the old 4th Ward alley. It's smaller than the Crown, but has character. An old building with stone walls and arched windows. The owner is willing to rent it with an option to buy." Caris turned the page of her notebook. I want to open a restaurant called Caris's Legacy there, keeping the best traditions of the Crown, but adding something of my own. Bram will be the chef, Nita, the manager, and the funding. Caris smiled. That's where I'll need your help. Caris mentioned some assets set up separately from the restaurant, besides the wine cellar. Yes, of course. Barkley opened a file. As I said, Caris created a rather complex ownership structure. The wine cellar, valued at over $200,000, is owned by a separate company in which you are the sole shareholder. The professional kitchen equipment is also registered in your name through a leasing company. There is also an investment account Caris created for business development with a sum of about $300,000. Caris listened with increasing surprise. She hadn't known about the investment account. Caris was a prudent woman, Barkley said. She wanted to make sure you had the resources to grow, no matter what happened with the main restaurant. You can use those funds to open a new restaurant, of course. Furthermore, you can take the wine collection and the kitchen equipment from the Legacy Crown at any time. Legally, they belong to you, not the restaurant itself. Caris thought for a moment. And the name, the Legacy Crown, is a well-known brand. The Legacy Crown brand is registered in the name of a company owned by Caris, which you have now taken over. The restaurant building is an independent asset, temporarily managed by Miss Niles, although without legal authority. But the brand, the recipes, the concept, it's all yours. A plan began to form in Caris's mind. She could take everything of value from the Legacy Crown, staff, equipment, wine collection, brand, and move it to a new location, leaving Tamsin with an empty shell. Meanwhile, at the Legacy Crown, the situation worsened daily. The advertising campaign Tamsin launched attracted new customers, but not those the restaurant was designed for. People drawn by the reduced prices were disappointed to find the food still more expensive than at regular establishments, and the quality no longer met the superior level. The older customers, hearing about Bram's departure and the menu changes, canceled their reservations en masse. The wine list, once the Crown's pride, was halved. Tamsin ordered the sale of the most expensive bottles to improve cash flow. But when the sommelier tried to access the cellar, it turned out that only Caris had the keys and codes. On the 7th day after Bram's departure, journalists from an influential food publication visited the restaurant. They planned to do a report on how the Legacy Crown had changed since Caris Holloway's death. Tamsin, unaware of the potential danger, gladly accepted the interview. "The Crown is being refreshed," she said as she posed for a photo in the dining room. "We are making the restaurant more modern, more accessible to everyday Atlantans. Caris created a great establishment, but time is pressing. We have to change to remain relevant." The journalist, a young man with a penetrating gaze, smiled politely as he took notes. "And Bram Cassidy, his departure surprised the culinary community." Tamsin played it down. "Bram is a talented chef, but his vision didn't align with ours. We are looking for a chef who shares our desire for more democratic cuisine." "Democratic?" The journalist raised an eyebrow. "More straightforward, less pretentious, clearer, good dishes. Why do we need all those French terms and tiny portions for enormous sums of money? People just want to eat well." After the interview, the journalist ordered dinner. He chose one of the few Crown specialties left on the menu, lamb fillet with rosemary and truffle mash. The dish, which had been a work of art under Bram, now looked lifeless and standard. The journalist took a few photos, thanked them courteously, and left, barely touching the food. The article came out 2 days later and was the final nail in the Legacy Crown's coffin. The headline read, "Crown in Free Fall: How Atlanta's Legendary Restaurant is Losing Its Greatness." The author detailed the changes since Caris's death, the departure of Bram and other key staff, and the decline in food and service quality. Special attention was paid to the interview with Tamsin, to her words about cuts and democratic cuisine, which the journalist contrasted with Caris Holloway's philosophy, which built the Legacy Crown on principles of exceptional quality and respect for the traditions of fine dining. The article instantly went viral on social media. Bloggers and culinary critics picked up the topic, sharing their memories of the Crown from the days of Caris and Bram. Someone even started the hashtag #SaveTheCrown y'all. When Jarvis showed his mother the article, Tamsin was furious. "Snobs! They are all snobs!" she shouted, pacing around the empty dining room. "Do they think they know what a restaurant should be?" "Mom, maybe we should rethink our strategy," Jarvis suggested cautiously. "Perhaps go back to the original concept. Find a new chef with fine dining experience." You're against me too? Tamsin turned sharply to her son. I thought you were on my side. I just want the restaurant to work, Jarvis said tiredly. And now we are losing customers, money, and reputation. I don't need those snobby customers. New ones will come who appreciate my vision. But the new customers didn't come. After the scathing article, there were even fewer reservations. On Friday nights, usually the busiest, there were only 3 couples sitting at the Legacy Crown. On the 9th day after Bram's departure, the final and decisive blow arrived. In the morning, men in suits entered the restaurant with documents. We represent the owner of the wine collection and the kitchen equipment, they informed a stunned Tamsin. According to the contracts, these assets can be seized at any time at the owner's request. What owner? Tamsin was indignant. This restaurant is mine. The premises are yours, Ms. Niles, but not the equipment or the wine collection. They belong to Ms. Caris Monroe. That same day, the professional kitchens, refrigerators, wine cellar, and even some of the furniture that was also decorated separately from the premises were removed from the Legacy Crown. In the evening, Jarvis found his mother sitting in the empty restaurant with a bottle of whiskey. It's over, she said in a lifeless voice. Without equipment, we can't operate. Without wine, we don't have half the profits. The staff is scattering. Jarvis sat beside her, unsure what to say. For the first time in his life, he saw his bossy, always confident mother broken. We could buy new equipment, he suggested without much conviction. Tamsin laughed bitterly. With what money? Do you know how much a professional kitchen costs? And the wine collection that Iris had amassed over 30 years? She took a sip directly from the bottle. We've been played, Jarvis. Your wife was trickier than I thought. On the 10th day of Tamsin's takeover of the restaurant, a notice appeared on the door of the Legacy Crown, closed for renovations, but those in the know realized there would be no renovation. The legendary restaurant, Eris Holloway's life's work, had ceased to exist, at least as Atlantans knew and loved it. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, in an old building with stone walls and arched windows, work was in full swing on a new restaurant. Eris's legacy was preparing to open its doors, bringing together the best of what Eris Holloway had created and adding Caris's new ideas. That night, as the Legacy Crown closed, Caris's phone rang. Jarvis's name appeared on the screen. Caris stared at the flashing screen, taking her time to answer. Jarvis's name on the screen brought up mixed feelings. Part of her wanted to ignore the call. The other part was curious to know what had made her husband reach out to her now that the Legacy Crown had finally closed. The phone kept ringing. After the 5th tone, she answered, "Hello?" Her voice was neutral, without a hint of emotion. "Caris." Jarvis's voice was drenched in panic. "Thank God you answered. We have to talk. It's urgent." "About what?" She tried to remain calm, though somewhere inside she felt a pang of satisfaction at how desperate her husband sounded. "The restaurant, the Crown." He sighed convulsively. "Everything has collapsed, Caris. Mom is hysterical. The lawyers are talking about possible bankruptcy because of the rent payments and vendor contracts. You have to help." Caris remained silent, giving Jarvis a chance to talk. She was sitting in a small office at the back of the premises where her new restaurant was due to open in a week. On the table in front of her were sample menus that Bram and she had been working on for the past few days. "Caris, can you hear me?" Jarvis's voice sounded desperate. "This is a disaster. Mom invested in renovations and new furniture. She took out a loan against her house. If the restaurant doesn't reopen, she will lose everything." "What can I do to help?" Caris asked, maintaining the same calm tone. "Can you?" Jarvis hesitated, as if afraid to say what he wanted to say out loud. "Can you talk to Bram, convince him to come back, or help us find a new chef, or return all the equipment and the wine collection?" Caris finished for him. "Yes." There was hope in his voice. "Can you do it?" "Mom is willing to do whatever it takes. She admits she was wrong, that she was hasty with the changes." Caris interrupted Jarvis. "I can't return the equipment and the wine. They have already been installed and placed in the new facility." "What new facility?" The confusion in Jarvis's voice turned into alarm. Caris took a deep breath. She knew this conversation was inevitable, but she would have preferred to have it in person rather than on the phone. "I'm opening a new restaurant, Jarvis. Eris's legacy. I have Bram, Nita, and most of the Crown staff with me." There was silence on the other end of the line, then a choked laugh, more like a sob. So all this time, while Mom and I were trying to save the crown, you were plotting your own restaurant, stealing our staff, our equipment? I haven't stolen anything, Jarvis. Caris's voice was still calm, but there was a note of steel in it. Everything I took belonged to me legally. The staff left of their own accord because they didn't want to work with your mother. You planned everything, Jarvis sounded accusatory. You knew what you were doing from the beginning. No, Caris answered truthfully. At first, I was surprised by what you did to me. Then I got angry, and then I realized that Eris's legacy wasn't the walls of the legacy crown. It was the people, the traditions, the recipes, all the things she had spent 30 years building and that your mother had nearly destroyed in 10 days. Jarvis was silent, and Caris imagined him pacing around the empty restaurant, trying to grasp the magnitude of the disaster. I need to see you, he finally said. I need to talk to you in person. Where are you now? Caris thought for a moment. Should she tell him the address of the new restaurant? What if he showed up with Tamsin and made a scene? I'm in the old 4th Ward alley, number 19, she said. But Jarvis, if you come with your mother or with lawyers, I won't talk. I'll come alone, he promised, in 20 minutes. After the conversation ended, Caris put away her phone and got up from the table. She walked to the window and looked out at the Atlanta sunset. The old street where her new restaurant was located was cobblestone and illuminated by stylized lanterns. The perfect place for an establishment that would maintain tradition but not be afraid of novelty. Exactly 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang and Jarvis walked in. He looked exhausted, rumpled shirt, dark circles under his eyes, messy hair, unusual for a man who had always been meticulous about his appearance. Caris stood at the threshold and looked at the room. The restaurant wasn't ready to open yet, but the main work was finished. Natural stone walls, wooden beams on the ceiling, and elegant arched windows created the atmosphere of an old sanctuary. In the center of the room were wooden tables with snow-white tablecloths, the same ones that decorated the legacy crown. On the back wall was a glass-doored wine cellar, behind which bottles from Eris's famous collection sparkled. Come in, Caris gestured to her husband. Be careful, the cables aren't all hidden near the entrance. Jarvis slowly walked into the room, his eyes fixed on the familiar furniture, the photos of Eris on the walls, and the kitchen utensils visible through the half-open door. So, this is it, he said quietly. All this time, you were plotting this. This, yes, Caris replied simply. Do you want coffee? The kitchen is already working. Jarvis nodded, still stunned by what he was seeing. Caris led him to a small office where they could talk without prying ears. Bram, who was working in the kitchen, nodded a greeting, but didn't interrupt the sauce he was preparing. When they sat down at the table with cups of coffee, Jarvis finally spoke. Why didn't you tell me about your plans, that you were going to open your own restaurant? Caris raised her eyebrows in surprise. Would you have listened to me after taking the documents and giving them to your mother? Jarvis lowered his eyes. I did a terrible thing. I know. It's just, Mom was so persuasive. She said you couldn't handle it, that the crown would go bankrupt under your management, that this was her chance to finally fulfill her dream. And you believed her more than your wife. Caris shook her head. You know, Jarvis, at first, I was devastated by your betrayal. 6 years of marriage, and you so easily took your mother's side against me. It wasn't easy, he objected softly. I was agonizing. I didn't sleep at night, especially when you didn't come home, didn't answer your phone. But you didn't do anything to remedy the situation, Caris finished. Even when it became obvious that your mother was destroying the restaurant, you still did nothing. Jarvis rubbed his face with his hands. I tried to talk to her. I really did. But you know how stubborn she is. She never admits her mistakes. She never listens to anyone's opinion. And you obeyed her all your life. Caris looked at her husband without anger, but rather with regret. You know, this restaurant crisis only proved what was already in our marriage. You could never stand up to your mother, not even for me. Jarvis looked up at her, his eyes full of pain. I love you, Caris. I've always loved you. I know, she replied softly, but sometimes love isn't enough. You have to have the courage to stand by the person you love, even when it's difficult. They fell silent as Jarvis reflected. Then he asked the question that seemed to torment him the most. What about us, Caris? Does our marriage have a future? It was a difficult question that Caris had been asking herself for the past few days. Did she still love Jarvis? Could she forgive his betrayal? Was it possible to rebuild trust after everything that had happened? I don't know, she answered honestly. Right now, all my focus is on opening the restaurant. That is my priority, and our relationship needs time and space for reevaluation. Do you want a divorce? There was pain in his voice. I want clarity, Jarvis, Caris replied. The past few weeks have shown me how much influence your mother had over you and our marriage. I cannot and will not return to the relationship we had. If we are to be together, it must be something new, based on equality and mutual respect. Jarvis nodded, accepting her words. And Mom? He asked. She's desperate. Caris invested all her savings into fixing up the crown. She took out a loan. It was her decision, Caris said firmly. She could have done the honest thing, admitted I owned the restaurant and offered to work with me. Instead, she chose the path of deception and manipulation. Now she has to face the consequences. You're not going to help her? Not even out of compassion? Caris hesitated for a moment. She wasn't happy about Tamsin's desperation, although part of her thought her mother-in-law was getting what she deserved. But she was willing to reach out to the woman who had scorned her for so long and who had ultimately tried to take her inheritance. I'll see what I can do, she finally said. Perhaps we can reach an agreement on the crown building, but I will not go back there, and I will not allow Eris's name or her recipes to be used. That is out of the question. Jarvis exhaled with relief. Thank you, Caris. I know you don't have to help after everything we've done, but I'm not doing this for you or your mother, Caris interrupted him. I'm doing it because I don't want Eris's name to be associated with scandals or litigation. She deserves a better legacy. Jarvis stood up, realizing the conversation was over. When is the opening? He asked, looking at the restaurant with different eyes, not as a lost property, but as a new endeavor. In a week, Caris replied. A quiet opening for select guests, and then the official launch. He hesitated. You'll invite me. Caris looked at her husband intently. His eyes showed sincere hope mixed with fear of rejection. We'll see, she said quietly. A lot depends on what you do in the coming days. When Jarvis left, Caris sat in her office, reflecting on the strange turns of fate. Until a month ago, her life had seemed predictable and stable. A small bakery, a marriage with Jarvis, occasional dinners with Eris. Now everything had changed. She was the owner of a successful restaurant, her marriage was hanging by a thread, and her relationship with Tamsin seemed to be taking a new, healthier course. A knock on the door pulled her out of her musings. It was Bram. Ms. Monroe? The chef still addressed her formally, even though they had been working side by side for several weeks. I've finished the main menu. I'd like to go over a few details with you. Caris smiled, setting aside her personal thoughts. Of course, Bram. And please, call me Caris. We're partners now. The chef nodded with a slight smile on his usually serious face. How did the conversation with your husband go? He asked, placing the menu sheets on the table. Better than I expected, Caris replied sincerely. He finally understood what happened, and he seems to realize his mistake. And his mother, she is more complicated. Caris sighed. She invested in the crown, took out a loan. Now everything could be gone. Bram chuckled. She got what she deserved. Eris would be turning in her grave if she saw what that woman did to her restaurant. I know, Caris agreed. But I don't want our success to be based on someone else's pain, even if it's deserved. Maybe we can find a way to help her without sacrificing what's important to us. Bram looked at her closely. You are very much like Eris, he said suddenly. She, too, always sought solutions that didn't leave scorched earth in their wake, even when dealing with people who didn't deserve it. Those words touched Caris deeply. To be like Eris, to continue her legacy, not only in the kitchen, but in the way she treated people, was the best compliment she could receive. Thank you, Bram, she said quietly. That means a lot to me. They moved on to discussing the menu, and she was absorbed in her work, pushing her personal worries to the background. There was still a lot to do before the grand opening, and she was determined to create a restaurant that Eris would be proud of. That night, just as she was about to leave, the phone rang again. This time, Barclay Quinn's name appeared on the screen. Ms. Monroe, the lawyer's voice sounded professional. I have news about the Legacy Crown building. There has been an offer to buy it from a restaurant group in New York. They are interested in entering the Atlanta market and are willing to pay a good price. Caris thought for a moment. Selling the building would solve many financial problems, but something prevented her from accepting immediately. Could we think about it until tomorrow? She asked. I have an idea I'd like to discuss with you. Of course, Barclay accepted. I'll be in the office from 9 a.m. When they finished talking, Caris stood in the middle of the nearly finished restaurant. The sunset light streamed through the arched windows, creating strange shadows on the stone walls. Eris's legacy was already acquiring a soul of its own, different from the Legacy Crown, but preserving its best traditions. The idea that occurred to Caris was risky, but potentially profitable for all parties. Instead of selling the Crown building, she could offer Tamsin the lease to open a completely different restaurant there with a new name, a new concept aimed at a wider audience. This was what Tamsin was trying to do with the Crown, but without destroying the existing legacy. That would require Tamsin to humble herself and admit her mistakes, qualities Caris knew she was not abundant in. But desperation sometimes worked wonders with human character. Caris smiled at her thoughts. Eris had always said that in the restaurant business, as in life, it was important not only to know how to prepare exquisite dishes, but also to find solutions that left a pleasant aftertaste for everyone involved. Perhaps this was exactly the solution she had just found. With these thoughts, Caris left the restaurant, feeling that for the first time in a long time, she was looking toward the future with genuine optimism. Regardless of what Tamsin decided or how her relationship with Jarvis turned out, she knew that Eris's legacy would be her own triumph, a place where she could finally realize her talent and vision while continuing the work of her dear godmother. The morning of the grand opening of Eris's legacy was surprisingly sunny for Atlanta. Caris arrived at the restaurant before 7, when the first rays of sunlight began to illuminate the cobblestones of the old Fourth Ward. She wanted to be alone inside before the hustle and bustle of the day ahead. The restaurant had been transformed in the last week. The stone walls, which seemed cold, were now decorated with antique photographs of Atlanta streets and portraits of Eris at different times in her life. In the center of the room was an arrangement of fresh flowers, lavender and wild herbs, Eris's favorite combination. The white tablecloths on the wooden tables, the polished silver cutlery, the crystal glasses, everything spoke of the refined elegance for which the Legacy Crown was famous in its best moments. Caris walked slowly through the hall, touching the backs of the chairs, checking the arrangement of the tables. Then she peeked into the kitchen, where work was already quietly underway. Bram and his team were preparing for the evening's opening. The chef greeted her with a respectful smile, but didn't interrupt the sauce he was preparing. Everything is going according to plan, Nita said, appearing at her side with a clipboard in hand. 24 confirmed reservations. The wine is being served from the cellar. The menus are printed. Staff will be ready by 5. Caris nodded gratefully. Nita and Bram's support during these weeks had been invaluable. Without their experience and knowledge, it was unlikely she would have managed to open the restaurant on such short notice. How do you feel? Nita asked, looking at Caris intently. Ready for the big day? Yes and no, Caris replied sincerely. I've been waiting for this moment, but now I'm a little scared. Eris built her reputation over 30 years, and I'm just her goddaughter, who still runs a small bakery. Nita put her hand on Caris's shoulder. Eris saw things in you that you still don't see in yourself. She never made decisions lightly, especially when it came to her life's work. If she chose you to be her successor, she had absolute confidence in your abilities. Those words gave Caris confidence. She took a deep breath and smiled. Thank you, Nita. It's time to stop doubting and do what needs to be done. The day flew by in the final preparations. Caris checked every detail, from the arrangement of the colors to the lighting, from the temperature of the wine to the immaculate uniforms of the staff. She wanted the first night of Eris's legacy to be impeccable. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, with only 1 hour left until the opening, there was a knock on the door. Caris, who was checking the table settings at the moment, flinched in surprise. Behind the glass door stood Jarvis, with a bouquet of white roses, Caris's favorite flowers. He looked out of place without his usual business suit. He was wearing simple jeans and a blue shirt, and incipient stubble was growing on his face. Caris hesitated, but opened the door. Hello, Jarvis said quietly. I know you're busy, but I wanted to see you before the opening. I wish you luck. He held out the bouquet and Caris accepted it with mixed feelings. Part of her still resented her husband for betraying her, but another part appreciated the gesture of support. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't expect to see you today." "I'm not staying for the opening," Jarvis quickly added. "I know my presence might be inappropriate, especially for the staff. I just wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you. What you've done in such a short time is impressive." Caris looked at her husband in silence, trying to decipher his motives. Was it genuine admiration or an attempt to regain her favor? "How is your mother?" she asked, changing the subject. Jarvis's face darkened. "Not well. She's still in shock about how things turned out. She invested all her savings in renovating the Crown, and now she's left with an empty premises and debts. I've been talking to Barclay about possible solutions," Caris said. "There's a buyer for the building, a restaurant group from New York, but I was thinking of another option." Jarvis looked surprised. "What was that?" "Tamsin can rent the premises at a reasonable price," Caris explained. "Not to continue the legacy Crown, that name will stay with me, but to create a new restaurant with her own concept, something more democratic, as she wanted, but without destroying the existing legacy." Jarvis looked at her in amazement. "You would do that? After everything she did?" Caris shrugged. "I'm not doing it for her. I'm doing it because it's what Eris would do. She always sought solutions that benefited all parties." Jarvis shook his head as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You are an incredible woman, Caris. Only now am I truly beginning to understand that." He paused and added in a quieter voice, "I had a serious talk with Mom, the first serious talk in years. I told her that her manipulation and control had ruined our marriage and almost ruined my life, that I would no longer allow her to interfere in my decisions." "And how did she react?" Caris asked, genuinely interested. "At first, she was furious." Jarvis smiled weakly. "She blamed you for everything. She said I was an ungrateful son. But then, when her emotions calmed down, I think she started to understand. At least she admitted that she acted impulsively with the restaurant, that she should have learned more about the business before changing everything." "That's progress," Caris commented. "Yes," Jarvis said thoughtfully. "By the way, I got an apartment. I've decided we both need space to think, and I need to learn to live on my own without Mom's influence." Caris was surprised. It was a decision that required a lot of courage on Jarvis's part, who had spent his whole life living with or near his mother. "I'm happy for you," she said sincerely. "That's an important step." They stood in silence, and there was more understanding in that silence than in many of their previous conversations. "I have to go," Jarvis finally said. "You have a big night ahead of you. I just wanted you to know that I'm working on myself, and I hope that someday you can trust me again." He turned to leave, but Caris called out to him. "Jarvis, tell your mother that my offer to rent the building is still on the table. Tell her to contact Barclay if she's interested." Jarvis nodded gratefully and left, leaving Caris with a bouquet of white roses and mixed feelings. Precisely at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the doors of Eris's legacy opened to the first guests. Among the attendees were longtime friends of Eris, loyal legacy Crown customers, well-known food critics, and several members of the press. Caris personally greeted each guest, feeling both excited and strangely calm, as if Eris were invisibly present to support her. The dinner was organized as a tribute to Eris Holloway. The menu included both her classic dishes and new interpretations created jointly by Bram and Caris. Each dish was accompanied by a small card with the story of its creation or an anecdote from Eris's life. When all the guests were seated, Caris stood up to give a brief speech. "Good evening," she began, and the room fell silent. "Thank you for coming to share this very special moment with us. Eris's legacy was created not only as a restaurant, but as an extension of the work of my godmother, Eris Holloway, who taught me that food is not just nourishment for the body, but also for the soul." She paused for reflection. 30 years ago, Eris opened a small cafe that became the legendary Legacy Crown. Today, we begin a new chapter in that story. We maintain the tradition and quality that made the Crown famous, but we are adding something of our own. Eris always said, "Honor the past, but look to the future." That is the principle we follow. The guests nodded in approval, and many raised their glasses in agreement. "Tonight," Caris continued, "Chef Bram Cassidy and his team will present dishes that reflect the soul of Southern American cuisine with a modern twist. Each dish has its own story, its own character. We hope these stories resonate in your hearts as they once did in ours." She raised her champagne glass. To Caris Holloway, whose passion for cooking and love for people has inspired us all, and I toast to new beginnings that preserve the best of the past. The room erupted in applause, and the dinner began. The dishes followed one another, each a small work of art. Lamb fillet with rosemary and truffle mash, Caris's specialty, fish cooked according to an old Georgia recipe with modern touches, and desserts personally created by Caris, including her famous lavender and honey cake. Critics took notes, photographers captured every dish, and guests exchanged enthusiastic comments. Caris went from table to table, listening to the feedback, telling stories about Caris, and answering questions about the restaurant's future plans. By the end of the evening, it was clear the opening of Caris's legacy had been a resounding success. Journalists promised glowing articles. Critics predicted Michelin stars in the near future. Loyal Legacy Crown customers expressed their joy that the spirit of their favorite restaurant was still alive. When the last diner left, it was already past midnight. The staff, though tired, were thrilled. Bram allowed himself a wide smile for the first time in a long time as he accepted congratulations from his team. "We did it," Nita told Caris when they were alone in the empty hall. "Caris would have been proud." "This is just the beginning," Caris replied, but in her voice there was confidence and anticipation, not anxiety. The next day, news of Caris's legacy's opening appeared in every local newspaper and food blog. The reviews were excellent, reservations poured in, and the restaurant phone wouldn't stop ringing. A week later, Caris received a surprise visit. Tamsin Niles, dressed in a modest gray suit instead of her usual bright attire, appeared at the restaurant between lunch and dinner when the hall was almost empty. "May I speak with the owner?" she asked Nita, who, surprised to see her, led her to Caris's office. Caris greeted her mother-in-law with courteous restraint. Tamsin pointed to the chair opposite her desk. "To what do I owe this visit?" Tamsin looked uncharacteristically uncertain, almost fragile. She sat down, carefully smoothed her skirt, and remained silent for a while, as if thinking about something. "I came to talk about your offer," she finally said, "the lease of the Crown building." Caris nodded, waiting for her to continue. "At first, I wanted to refuse," Tamsin admitted. "Pride wouldn't let me accept help from—" She hesitated. "From someone I have treated badly." "I understand," Caris replied calmly. "But then I looked at the empty building, I counted the debts, and I realized I had no choice." Tamsin smiled faintly. "Besides, Jarvis made me see things differently. He said I had always dreamed of owning my own restaurant, but I was trying to steal someone else's dream instead of creating my own." Caris was surprised by such frankness and self-criticism from Tamsin. It seemed that the recent events had truly changed something in this powerful woman. "What have you decided?" Caris asked. "I would like to accept your offer," Tamsin replied, "to open a new restaurant in the Crown building with a different name and concept. Something more accessible to ordinary people. A bistro with good home cooking at reasonable prices." "I think that's a great idea," Caris said sincerely. That neighborhood lacked exactly such an establishment. Tamsin nodded, and then added with visible effort, "I would also like to apologize for the way I have treated you over the years, for what I did with Caris's inheritance. I acted out of jealousy and ambition without thinking about the consequences." Caris was stunned. She had never heard her mother-in-law apologize before. "I appreciate your words, Tamsin," she replied after a pause, "and I am ready to move forward without holding a grudge." "Thank you." Tamsin seemed genuinely grateful. "One more thing. Jarvis is really worried about your marriage. He is genuinely changing Caris. For the first time in years, I see true determination and independence in him." Caris remained silent. She didn't want to discuss her marriage with Tamsin, not even with this new, humbler version of her mother-in-law. "I'm not interfering," Tamsin quickly added, realizing her reaction. "I just wanted you to know that he's truly sorry and trying to be a better person." When Tamsin left, Caris sat in her office for a long time, reflecting on the vicissitudes of fate. A month ago, her life had seemed predictable and stable. A small bakery, a marriage with Jarvis, occasional dinners with Caris. Now, everything had changed. She owned a successful restaurant. Her marriage was hanging by a thread, and her relationship with Tamsin seemed to be taking a new, healthier course. That night, as the restaurant filled with diners, Caris stood at the bar, observing her team at work. Bram led the kitchen with his usual rigor and attention to detail. Nita supervised the service, moving elegantly among the tables. Waiters, sommeliers, and kitchen assistants worked harmoniously as a single organism. "This is your legacy, Aris," Caris thought, addressing her godmother mentally. "Not just the recipes and not just the restaurant, but the people you brought together, and I promise to preserve and enhance what you created." At that moment, Edward, the sommelier, approached her with a bottle of wine. "Ms. Monroe," he said with a respectful smile, "the guest at table 5 asked me to give you this. He said it was Aris's favorite wine, and she always opened a bottle on special days." Caris took the bottle and read the label. It was a rare vintage that Aris greatly appreciated and saved for special occasions. She turned toward table 5 and saw Jarvis sitting modestly in a corner of the room. Their eyes met across the crowded restaurant. Jarvis smiled slightly but didn't try to approach, respecting her space and her time. Caris hesitated for a moment, then nodded to the sommelier. "Open the bottle and pour 2 glasses. I'll join my guest shortly." She didn't know if her marriage to Jarvis had a future. She wasn't sure if she could ever completely forgive his betrayal. But in that moment, standing in the middle of her successful restaurant, surrounded by people who believed in her, Caris felt a strange certainty. Whatever happened, she could handle it. Aris's legacy lived on in her, not only in her culinary skills, but in her confidence, her determination, her ability to forgive and move forward, in the ability to create not only exquisite meals, but harmonious relationships, in the ability to find a balance between respect for tradition and the courage to try new things. Caris walked toward Jarvis's table, feeling her inner strength grow with every step. A strength she had never known before, but which had always been there waiting to be unlocked. "I'm really glad you're here and that I could share my story with you." If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from.